Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay and I want to welcome you to video 9. We've gone through a lot, so I want you to think back to all the training through the live action shots of Thanos, turning to ash, blowing apart. We've gone through so much training in such a little amount of time. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit. I asked you guys a couple of emails back what training you would like to see next. And I've had non-stop comments, emails, direct messages all saying that you want the Doctor Strange Portal effect. So this is one I thought I'd put together rather quickly, but it'll be one that we can dive into and set up in a live action shot. So not only doing the effect, which is pretty easy to do, to be honest, but on top of that, doing the integration with the background footage, relighting the environment based on the particles, as well as doing the reflections, the other interaction elements, doing all the render passes, compositing, and seeing it through to finish. So make sure to download all the scene files, the tracked cameras, the background footage, everything you need to go through this lesson. The link is below this video because you don't want to miss out on all of the additional assets, as well as, of course, moving to the next video where we'll be finishing it all off in compositing as well. So there's a lot to get into. I'm really excited for this. Don't forget the FXTD mentorship is about to close down as we start to go through 1 year of intense visual effects training. It's going to be a lot of fun, and the registration will close down for another year in a couple of days from now. So I'm excited to get into this video. Let's dive in.
Okay, so here we have it. This scene file here, I'm probably going to save it out as an Alembic. What this is a LiDAR scan. And LiDARs are what a lot of the self-driving cars are currently using to see. And LiDARs will create a data set allowing you to collect all this information, and it'll give you an accurate model. I was using a scanner that would capture within 8 millimeters of the capture, so it's very accurate. And so this allows me to go on to a location, scan it, and then it'll make camera tracking and everything else a lot easier. So this is the set that we end up with, and we have a camera track for it. So you might recognize the footage here. This is actually footage from the plasma course that is available that I created not too long ago. And the plasma course is like a giant plasma ball. And I thought that it would be really cool to use this footage, this data set, and everything else for it. Just because I really love the blues, the contrast in the shot in general, and the low light in general as well. So I felt like with having kind of an orange, very reflective light source spinning around, it would just look really cool. So the idea is that we'll have footage that we're going to comp into in the next lesson, and the idea will be that we'll have this spirally Doctor Strange Portal effect. And yeah, so when we go through, I'm not sure what's in this scene. We got a locator, and we got a camera, and we got the actual environment. I'm not going to go and build layers and keep things clean. I'm just giving you a heads up. I'm going to be a little bit messy this lesson, but I feel like we've been on this long journey together that I think we're in a good spot. You know, I feel like you know the way that I work, and at the same time, like, you can anticipate a lot of what I'm probably going to do. Part of what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a more optimized ground floor. So in other words, like, we have this whole environment. We want to use this later for catching reflections, for lighting. Those things are going to be really important when it comes to the integration, being able to not only have a tracked camera, but make it really feel like it's sitting in the scene. But for now, I want to create a ground area where we'll have all the particles falling on the ground and doing their thing. So I'm going to create a sphere. I'm going to drag this out just big enough to kind of capture what I think will work. And I'm going to use this sphere to remove everything that's not inside of it. Okay, so I'm going to select our whole object here. I'm going to apply a volume select, change this to face, and object, and invert it, and I'm going to pick the sphere. So all I did is I basically said select everything in the object that's inside the sphere, and I inverted that so it's everything outside the sphere. And now I'll apply a delete mesh. Okay, now if I hide the sphere, what we end up with is this mesh representing the sphere. Okay, so, and a little bit of the ceiling as well, it looks like. So that'll work out well just because it means that wherever we want this to go, I would just move the sphere and it would adapt that mesh. So if I wanted this to be a little bit more ahead, I can just move it wherever I need it to be, and it's going to draw that mesh. Okay, so just to make this really obvious, I'm going to go to one of the walls, or somewhere. Maybe I'll do it here. I just want to just really make this obvious for everyone. So wherever this is, now I'm going to try and go object properties, display as box, non-renderable. Does that work? Yeah, weird. Okay, so anyway, you can see inside of here that it's literally allowing me to capture whatever part of the mesh I want. Okay, so where do we want our effect to be? I'm going to select my ground again, right click, clone as a copy, and we'll just call this env, and then parking garage, I don't know, something like that. And we'll just undo what we just did. So we'll turn off delete mesh and volume select. So at least now we have our environment, but we're also going to have that the other piece wherever we need it to be. And perhaps with this other one, we can change the wire color. So I'm just clicking this little icon here, and this brings up a palette where I could say, all right, let's make this green. Okay, now that's going to be a bit more obvious. So moving this in the frame, I'm just going to create our effect. I'm going to create a circle which is going to represent our effect. And 3ds Max 3, I paused because I was just thinking how I still say 3D Studio Max, and Autodesk once corrected me in an interview. They're like, because it was on camera, they're like, no, you got to say 3ds Max. We're 3ds Max now. 3ds Max. Max 3 came out with Ringwave, which, because shockwaves were all the thing in the 90s, and so I'm just dragging a Ringwave out into the scene, and we'll play with the settings in a moment. I'm just going to hide our big geometry. Okay, so we have this circle here, and I'm just going to rotate it, and I'm just going to try and make it face the camera. And, oops, local. Alright, and we're just going to position it. So keep in mind that this is the framing that we're going to use, okay? Oh, and with the Ringwave, I was just scrubbing, it's disappearing, so if we go into the modifier panel, we can say end time 1000, and that way it's not going to disappear on us. It's kind of annoying. So I think this is just good context that now that we can see where this is, we could select the sphere, and we could select the Ringwave, and we could just reposition it slightly, maybe move it away, whatever we want, where we can see the Ringwave in full frame. Alright, so it's a little bit far away. Keep in mind too, one thing you probably noticed about me is that I try to keep everything maybe not the neatest, but because usually I'll work creatively and then I tidy things up before I hand them off as assets, but I tend to build workflows that are very easy to update. So in other words, if we need to move the entire effect somewhere else, we could probably just move like one node and it'll do the whole thing. So anyway, we have now this ring wave sitting there in frame. And as we scrub through the animation, we'll see that, you know, it's in frame the whole time. Okay, so we can probably reposition it. We can worry about that later. At this point, though, I want this to be uneven all the way around. And the reason is that, just, again, going by memory, but Doctor Strange effect, I feel like some of the subtleties that really worked for it, and I can guarantee that this happened through building up the effect, was that a lot of time when you're building out effects like this that are revolving very quickly, they tend to just repeat themselves and become very generic. So trying to add a lot of little pulsing and just things to help kind of break things up is really important. So if you have something spinning really quick, it's just going to look very repetitive. So I think making the shape overall just a little bit more on the outer edge, uneven, and just the whole shape, if there's some areas bigger than others, it'll just kind of create a bit more of an organic pattern. So we have the width flux. I'm just going to like, turn that on first and then put in 10 cycles. So this is just kind of giving us a little bit of an offset. And this just might be something to play with. And we have the cycles, and the cycles don't need to be big. It could literally be something like, I'm saying literally a lot. So just something that's just not too repetitive. And again, like, we can play with this later once we see what's going on, but it's just something to keep in mind. But I do want to match the inside to this a little bit. So the inner edge, we could do the same thing. We could just make it not as strong. The cycles we could lower down a little bit. Oh, so it has minus cycles, that's what's going on. So it has minus cycles here, but the major ones is really what's we want to focus on. Okay, so we'll worry about this more later, but I just want something that's a bit more broken up, and yeah, we'll massage this more later on. So another key thing that I want to do is I want to just animate this rotating. Okay, so I'm going to turn on auto key, and let's give it 10 frames. I'm going to go to rotate. I'm going to change the coordinate system up here to local and make sure auto key's on. And I'm just going to spin this around a little bit. We'll say 360 degrees. I want you to use your best judgment here, and also at the same time, like, don't worry about my settings too much. All I want is something that's spinning pretty damn quick, okay? And we can play with this more later on. We only set 10 keyframes, so it's spanned at the beginning. It also has a cycling going on, crawl time. So let's just kill crawl time. Let's zero out, anything that says crawl time, because this is kind of like a phasing that's going on. So I guess there's one more crawl time. Okay, so we just don't want this to phase, but I do want this to rotate at the beginning. Now, let's go to the curve editor. We'll go to, I think it's Y, right? BY. Yeah, Y. Okay, so we have our green curve. And what I want to do, I'm going to select this whole curve. First of all, let's just click on the parameter outer range types. Click there. And then we have these different things that will happen when it reaches the end of its animation. And I'm going to say relative repeat. And what that will do is it'll continue to rotate it forever. And I'm going to make this also linear. So I'm going to change the color of this. So remember, we go up here. Just something a bit more easy to see. So now this is going to rotate forever. And like I said, we can play with this later on, but for now I just want something that is spinning. So let's just get into the good stuff. I'm going to get my sphere, and I'm going to make this bigger. So I'm going to scale it. Scale it. Because I want this to be the collision area. So I want there to be a fair amount, but I just don't want to use the whole thing because it's a pretty dense area. And we can also move it ahead a little bit more. Or where the heck is that thing? Yeah, we'll just move it a little bit ahead of our ring here. Okay. Now, let's create tyFlow. Let's just get into this. So, create panel, geometry, standard, primitives, tyFlow. Drop this in. And we'll set this up. Okay. So first of all, let's just populate this. So I'm going to create a birth texture. And let's just set it to rate. And we'll give it like a fairly big rate. Let's say 50. Add a position object. Alright, so position object. Pick here. And next, what are we going to do? We're emitting particles onto our sphere, but they're not doing anything, so we'll add inherit movement. Now, what's happening is it's actually inheriting the velocity of the object, so it's flicking these away, and it's kind of acting crazy. Alright, so let's just go into our object again, and on frame 10, I'm going to make this about half the speed. So let's just do, I don't know, like negative 165. Okay, so 0 to negative 165 at frame 10. So just by having that, I think that's spinning a bit better. I think that's a good starting point for what we want to do. Now, I'm not as concerned about the inheritance, but let's just start to set this up. I'm going to throw in a force and give it some gravity. I think that's a good kind of starting point for what we're doing. So just drop this here. I'm going to keep that event because we'll spawn to it soon. So with the force, let's just give it, I don't know, like negative 0.8, something like that. And that way these particles are going to start falling to the ground. I think already, like, that's looking good. Let's also add a collision, and we're going to set this object. So always put the collision at the bottom because you want it to calculate after all the advections it's going to apply. So we'll just add the LiDAR in, and now you can see it's kind of like bouncing away where necessary. So unhiding our sphere because I hit it. I'm going to make the sphere bigger, and that will obviously make the collision area bigger, and that way we won't get as much. Alright, that's a little bit too big, but you get the idea. So just compensate for that. Something like that. So anyway, whole point is that now we have the ground, and we have all these particles being flung off. And it's very linear because this is, and that's fine for now. What else can we do? Well, I think for now, like, the key thing that I want to do is set up a spawn, because I think, like, it's mainly going to be the trails that are going to be seen. So let's link this up, and we say travel by distance, and now shit's getting crazy. So this is a bit better. I'm going to make sure the spawn is at the bottom. And now you can see it's getting a bit of a different result because of that. With the gravity here, I'm going to right click, copy, and I'm just going to paste. I won't paste instance, but that's helping make it all fall on the ground. Let's get the collision, copy, paste instance, and now these particles are going to collide on the ground. So now we're getting something kind of interesting already. Like it's already coming together a little bit. The key thing is going to be that this one will want to make it a bit more interesting overall. I do think that both of these probably need a slow operator. Even just a little bit of drag is going to go a long way in this situation. So keeping a default value of 5, I'll put it down here. and paste it in here. And this is just going to give it, oops, just a little bit of drag, which I think will help. Now, the shapes look weird, and that's because they're inheriting 100%. So we don't want that. What I would suggest is we go to spawn, and we'll play with the inheritance a little bit just to taper it back a little bit. So down here, we have the inheritance. If we said 25%, then we're going to get a very different look. We are getting a lot falling through the ground. Kind of surprised by that, which we'll fix that in a second. So now this is kind of interesting. I think this feels a bit more like Sparks a little bit. But like I said, it's falling through the ground, and also this object is spinning really quick. So I think by default we've got tyFlow sampling once per frame, which is not enough. So I'm selecting my tyFlow node, going to main settings, and we can change this to sample 8 times per frame. Okay, and if we do that, we're actually getting a very different look, because now it actually samples 8 times per frame. So this is able to keep up with the simulation. So I like that. I think that's cool. We'll give it a little bit of variation, like 10%. And that's just going to help overall. What else can we do? Well, we can do a lot more, but let's go back to Force. I might play with this a little bit, give it some turbulence, just make it a bit more interesting. I don't want to go crazy, but we'll add turb 0.5. Again, I'm just going to throw in some random numbers, but you know, if I'm doing a lower number here and a stronger number here, it means I want some offset. It's not going to be like really fine detail, because it's not what I'm going for, but you know, you can see here I'm more trying to offset the feeling of it. Okay, so right now it does look a bit weird though, and the reason is because the sparks don't last forever. Okay, the sparks are meant to die out pretty quickly because they're going to cool down very quickly. So if we add a delete operator to this, set it to 2, set the particle age 2, doesn't really matter, and that is going to help a little bit. We give it a little bit of variation, like 5. Now these particles aren't going to live forever. The problem is that their parent is. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, paste it as a standalone, not an instance, and we'll set this one a little bit longer. We'll say 3. Okay, so not too much longer, but adding the 2, now we're starting to get something already that's a little bit more interesting, because now what's happening is it's spinning around. It's able to keep up with the spinning around. The particles are only spawning for 3 frames, the heads, and then those will spawn for 3 frames, the trail. So we're just kind of getting something interesting, but it's keeping really close to the shape because they don't live too long, so it's not going to get too crazy overall. So I like that. I think that it's already starting to work, but we need more definition. At the same time, I'd like to start to set up the shapes and everything. So if we were to add in a shape, change the display to geometry. So with this shape, I want it to be 3D. We could do cubes, we could do a lot of different things. I'm just going to roll with cubes. And all I want to do, I want to just have something fairly small, you know, because I want to make these ultra fine. So we could do like 10. I mean, it's kind of really tiny. So the next thing I was going to do, and I guess maybe I should just do it, is I was going to add more definition. I think that this will go a long way with what we're doing. So if we change the step size to, I don't know, 0.3, something like that, now we're going to deal with way more particles. But if we actually tell the particle count to be much higher, then we're going to emit more particles doing this stuff. So if I did 550 instead of 50, then we're going to have some serious particles to work with. Now we're looking good. So I'm going to turn display off in here, so that way I'm just focused on this, but already that's starting to look pretty cool. And it's purely from having the trail set up, having the shapes, having this amount spawning everything. So with the shape now, we could make it a little bit smaller. Try 7.5, something like that. I'd like to randomize this a little bit, so we could try 25 variation. Either way, they're going to look a bit dumb because they're all facing us right now. So the other thing I'd like to do is just add in, rotation. And rotation will just randomly orientate it, okay? And that's going to help us just to get something going. That's all at different angles, and I think that'll be important later on. Alright, so the other thing is we got particles falling through the ground, and I think the reason for that's probably just the mesh is emitting slightly in the ground. Because tyFlow is pretty accurate with catching this stuff, so that's always going to be a safe bet, I think. So just for fun, I just cached the entire thing just so we could see this. And yeah, I mean, overall, it's looking pretty cool already. Definitely lots to do, but it's a good starting point, right? So what else do we want to do here? We got sparks coming out pretty quick. Let's see. I might make the actual body of the ring wave a little bit thinner overall. And easiest way to do that, set this to like 22. And I might just move this lower to the ground. Let's move it closer. So I'm just making it thinner and a little bit smaller overall, but I'm going to also make it closer. And the reason is I want to see more of the sparks kind of hitting the ground. Alright, and about there. Okay, so I just want to make that a little bit thinner, but I figured while we're at it, I can move this a bit closer overall. Whoops. Also, with the ground, one other thing I had mentioned is we could totally optimize the crap out of this ground and make it even faster for collisions. We'd want to remove our selection, so mesh select or edit poly, and technically mesh selects faster, but anyway, optimize, because the geometry doesn't need to be too complex. So something like that. And again, just moving this a bit more full frame. Okay, so I just want to do that, but the main thing is we've made it a lot thinner, which I think is good. The grounds are a lot more optimized, which should make it a little bit faster. Now, going back to our position, I think it's mainly the gravity, stuff like that. In fact, sorry, let's go our force and just see what we can do here. So I'm going to right click and make sure this is unique. Yeah, it is. So the gravity, I like the gravity being strong for the head particles, but the trails that's building, let's lower the gravity, and that way it's not going to be falling down so much onto that circle as it was. Now it's raised up a lot more, so that's cool. We could introduce a little bit more turbulence, but I don't know, I don't want this to be too crazy. So I think overall what we got works. Got our collisions, we won't worry about that just yet. With the position object, I might up the inheritance slightly, and that's just going to help throw it outward more, and that way it's not going to fall in on itself. So I'm going to say 110, and we'll give it a little bit of divergence, and that's just going to help it spread as it rotates around. So you'll notice now it's a little bit more three-dimensional. Just a little bit. But that's mainly the divergence doing that. Finally, with our collisions, I'd like these to bounce a little bit overall, so let's just double the bounce. And I'll do this not on a big frame, and I'll give it some variation. The friction, we could probably lower down a little bit as well. And that's just going to help allow these to bounce around a little bit more, be a bit more random. But I mean, overall, that's looking pretty cool. I wouldn't mind doing a render and seeing how this looks, but before we do that, let's set up the shader. I think this will be just really important to just get the look right. Otherwise, you know, we can guess away all day long, but I think that this is going to be really critical. So part of being able to see what we're working with is a mesh operator, and we haven't really used this yet because we cached everything out, but I don't want to here. And we'll say VRay instances with the mesh. I'm going to throw in a material, and actually I meant to say an instance material. But we also have the material ID, and I wouldn't mind doing that later. I'm going to randomize this. I always intended to have, like, that's at least how I typically do my sparks, is I'll have 2 or 3 shaders of different saturations, different brightness, stuff like that. So the mesh is what's going to render it. This is where we reference our material, and this is where we'll randomize it. Okay, so with the instance, I'm going to load up the material editor. Sorry, I had a bunch of old stuff still in there. And I'm just going to get material, do a VRay material. And just to simply set this up, I'm just going to make a fall off. And usually, for me, I've always found sparks to be pretty easy. I'm just going to do, in the center, more of a washed out, kind of like peach color. I want this to be more washed out, and then we'll do one that's more saturated. So do something like that, and then the other one will be much more saturated. It's like orange, like that. Okay? And that way it's really kind of hot in the center. Now, one of the key things to do is drag your diffuse down to self-illumination, because we want this to be a light source, we want it to be bright. And let's just do that, and then we can work from there. But I'm just going to drag this material into our material here. We don't need to worry about that yet. But let's just render out a frame, and we can check it out, and then we can make our decision about what to do next. Okay, so just make sure you're rendering a single frame. I promise I'll tidy this up if I'm not just handing over an Alembic, because I was basing this off of Plasma originally. So I just pulled in all that stuff. So anyway, it should just be like this. We got GI on. We don't really need GI right now, but I'll keep that on. Main thing is, let's make sure it's progressive. It's going to be a lot faster. Motion blur, let's turn on. And it's going to go a little bit higher resolution. Okay, so I'm just going to render our first frame. We can take a look. And the key thing here is just I want to get an idea of, like, you know, the brightness, the size of it, all these different things, the motion blur, just get an idea of, like, how this is going to look. I honestly think that with the self-illumination on, we don't probably need any GI, so the pre-calculation of the GI right now is going to overkill. Okay, so already starting to look really good. Definitely things we can do to it, but I think it's looking pretty neat. A couple of things we can do is we can make this brighter. We could do the multiplier on the self-illumination, and this will make it more additive, basically. So by doing that, and again, let's try killing GI and to see what we get. But overall, you can see now, just by pumping up the multipliers, making it more additive on itself, and that really helps. I'm not referencing Doctor Strange 100%, but I believe the stuff in there is more, it's a little bit more transparent than what we have, which is fine. Again, if we want to make it transparent, we can. There's definitely things that we can tweak overall. We could try translucency, which is not the same, but you know, if we want to throw translucency on, you know, obviously transparency or opacity basically is down here. So usually with sparks, I like to throw a lot of speck on there, and the reason is just from certain angles, things will get brighter or lighter, but in this case, you know, I don't think we need to worry about that too much. So I think like overall, the shade is looking really good. We can go back in here with motion blur. We could set like the duration. We could up the samples. I think we could try upping the duration, see what we get. I would like to increase the render times a little bit, just to get a little bit more detail from them. I think under image filter, right now this is, again, I was using my settings from Plasma when I pulled in the LiDAR model. So we'll change it to triangle filter, which I think is probably a better bet. So these are subtle changes, but I think they'll probably help the quality overall. So I think we're in a pretty good spot right now. There's definitely more I want to do, but I want, as we get towards the end, not to overload you too much, and I want you to actually make it to the end. So it's funny, one of the most common things I keep getting is make the lessons 20 minutes long. And I hate to say it, but two things. The level of output we're trying to get done requires a lot of information, right? So if I could make these a 5-minute, 10-minute tutorial, I would. And the other thing is, to cover everything that we would be doing, I could make in 20 minutes, but it would be decimation video 16 of 50, right? So they are definitely big lessons because we're trying to do big amount of effects. And this is something I struggle with because I get a lot of people who want everything easy, and I honestly, sometimes struggle with like wondering if people don't want to actually have like industry knowledge, they just want easy tutorials. And that sounds like a bit of a rant, but having mentored a lot of people, it's something that I'm constantly trying to make sure that people are able to stick with what we're doing. The mentorship lessons are about 20 minutes on average. They're a lot more focused because we have a year and I'm trying to go through a journey. But when we have 2 weeks, which is what the Thanos training, the decimation training is designed to be, it's so much information being thrown at you, and obviously it's going to be overwhelming, but it's the nature of the beast, and it's tricky to kind of condense that information into a short period of time. So I like what we got. This is a good start. Definitely more to go, but take a break, play around, absorb the information. Next lesson, we're going to do a little bit of tweaking to the effect next video, and then we'll look at building out our render passes. We're getting reflections on the ground, getting this all into comp. So we've done the hard part. Now it's going to be more about finessing everything and seeing it through to finish. So I'll see you in the next video.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Obviously, in the next video, you will be going through and finishing it all off. The rendering, the lighting, the shaders, the compositing, all of this is really where we get to make this effect sing. So if you want to get access to that, as well as all the scene files, everything else, make sure to click the links below to get all the assets and download them all and get set up. But that being said, I'll see you in the next video.